having a look at democracy today. Now, democracy has got five essential requirements that has got to be fulfilled. Without these five essential requirements, there cannot be any democracy. So, but before discussing that, we are having a look at politics first of all. Now, politics used to be a blood sport. Uh, Basically, in politics, previous to democracy, uh, the winner not only took all, the loser was generally killed on the battlefield or outside. In fact, it was so bad that in the Ottoman Empire, uh, the the person who finally became the caliph, that is the king, would kill off all his brothers. And there was this horrible case in which uh, the winner of the political race, he hesitated, and when he hesitated, then the focus shifted to the little princes. He had about 17 brothers, starting from the age of 1 onwards. And this hesitation actually uh, was a bad thing, because after about 2 weeks, they decided that the brother should be killed. So, in one night, all 17 of them were killed, and there were little caskets, a foot long, taken out and buried. And probably that was the end of that, because after that, they couldn't do it after that. It no longer acceptable. So, politics is a blood sport. However, in this modern version, it no longer is, because now we have a democratic structure. In the democratic structure, it is no longer a blood sport, but the objectives of politics are still very much there, to grab the power and to rule a country, or maybe rule a business. Rules are more or less the same. Now, uh, it is commonly thought of, or people expect, that a politician should not be a politician. A politician in it for the game of power, and power is being able to do things that people who do not approve it will also have to accept it. Power is when you are able to force things on people which they don't want to accept. Things like taxes, things like jailing criminals. This is all exercise of power, because the definition of a criminal is still very difficult. Uh, People who are selling drugs, for example, they think that we are just supplying a demand. They don't consider themselves criminals. So it is not always so clean cut and so this clear that it is a criminal. In fact, the definition of a criminal changes over time. However, that is not the subject today. So the subject today is the five essentials of democracy. Now, the first essential of democracy is legitimacy of the opposition. Now, this is very important, because if the opposition is not considered legitimate, then they cannot be in a democracy. So, by legitimacy of the opposition, I mean that the opposition has got some constitutional means to come to power. Opposition for opposition's sake has got no meaning whatsoever. So, it's very important that the opposition has got a constitutional way to come to power. So, that gives legitimacy to the opposition. And if there is a probability of the opposition come to power, then that by itself gives a lot of political power to the opposition. Now, number two, this is the most important of all, fixed term. There has to be a fixed term in politics. That is, before the election, the term should be fixed, and should be fixed exactly from which hour of which day of which month of which year the tenure starts, and then which hour of which month the tenure ends. So the term should be fixed. Preferably, the number of terms should also be fixed. However, that is not an essential requirement. It's a preferable requirement. So you must have a fixed term uh, for the government after the election. If the term is not fixed and things are for life and stuff like that, then it no longer is democracy. So let us see then. Let's come to the uh, third part. This is freedom of association. That is, you are able to put together a group of people to oppose or favor the government. This is also very important. If this is not being allowed, then obviously the person cannot be overthrown. The ruler, it obviously is legitimate for you to overthrow the ruler, but at the same time you are allowed to put together. This is my wife's cat, it's not my cat. And if I do something to him, she'll come on to me by like a ton of bricks. So you got to keep quiet. Anyway, so this freedom of association is very important for democracy. That people are allowed to get together, form a party, not even form a party, just form a movement and stuff like that. But obviously there is a limitation to that, and that limitation is point number 4: suppression of violence. Now, freedom, all the freedom we're talking about, these are constitutional freedoms. These freedoms can only be exercised if the group or the person or the people are not violent. If there is violence in the group and the aims of the group is violence, then the freedom should not only be denied, they should be persecuted and not allowed to function. So the freedoms that democracy affords to the opposition and the ruling party is limited to the extent of them being non-violent. If there is a movement or there is a political party that is violent, that has to be suppressed, because once you allow violence in the system, then there is no limit to it and the system collapses. So this is the fourth point. All the rights and all the freedoms associated with democracy comes with that price of not being violent at all. Then we come to this violence it's not necessarily that this violence is actual violence. Even threats of violence cannot be allowed. But threats of violence, obviously, that can be dealt in different way than actual violence. Then we come to the last part. This is the number 5th part, and this is it's very difficult to understand this 5th part. So maybe a bit of concentration from the viewer is required. The 5th part is acceptance of the result. Now there is an election in democracy, and it's for a fixed term, and all the stuff, all that session, all the thing is given. None of it has got any meaning if there is no acceptance. The party that loses and the party that wins have got to accept the result of the election, at least for the tenure of the government. After the tenure of the government, then you can go back to the polls and decide. So acceptance of the result is a very important part of democracy, and most of the African states, it is here that they falter. They won't accept the result, and in communist countries, even when they did have free elections towards the end of their regimes, then they refused to accept the result. So the result of even the opposition must accept the acceptance of the results. I know what I'm pointing out to you. I'm pointing out to you the Democratic Party that lost 2014 elections, 2016 elections, and then they went back and they began to oppose the result. They refused to accept the result. They were saying things like the person who's elected is not a president and all this stupid stuff. That is not democratic. And that is one more nail in the coffin of United States. So these are the five important. I'm not including elections because it's so obvious, but these are not so obvious. So these five important points are the legitimacy of the opposition, number one. Number two, fixed term. Number three, freedom of association. Number four, separation of violence for political or even otherwise. Violence cannot be allowed in the system. And threats to be violent, and that is the part of number four. And number fifth is acceptance of the result. These are all very important facets of democracy. Without this, we cannot have democracy. So all these communist and fascist and dictatorial regimes, they pretend to have elections, they pretend everything, but they fail in one or all these counts. With this, I come to end of this talk with you. I know this has got very deep implications for democratic politics in which places where this imperfect democracy, or in those places in which democracy is working but people are sabotaging it one way or another. Thanks for listening, guys. This is Mizo signing off.